What happens when a future king decides he's had enough of being portrayed as a violent bully, a cold-hearted brother, and the villain of someone else's story? What happens when years of silence finally shatter, and Prince William, the man raised from birth to embody restraint, duty, and public composure, decides to take his own brother to court? It sounds unthinkable, doesn't it? The kind of twist that even the most dramatic royal commentators wouldn't dare predict. And yet, here we are. Because behind the facade of royal unity, behind the polished speeches, the staged smiles, and the carefully curated public appearances, something has been rumbling beneath the surface. Something big, something dangerous, something that has pushed Prince William, yes, William, to the brink of a decision that could alter not just the brothers' relationship forever, but the future of the monarchy itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the most shocking part? Prince Harry never saw it coming. Let's begin with a truth the palace would never say out loud, but everyone can sense. This family is fractured in ways the public barely understands. And every time Harry speaks, writes, or films something about his past life as a royal, those fractures widen, deepen, and become harder to ignore. With Spare, he didn't just open the door to long-buried resentments. He kicked it off its hinges. And with Meghan by his side, his Netflix series didn't just retell his version of the story. It amplified it for a global audience hungry for drama. William, for years, stayed silent. He had to. Future kings don't clap back. They don't publish memoirs. They don't correct narratives on social media. They don't sit with Oprah. They don't defend themselves in TikTok compilations, YouTube breakdowns, or endless podcasts analyzing every blink, smile, or eyebrow raise. Future kings endure. They swallow. They maintain dignity at all costs. But how long can a man stay silent when the world is calling him a violent aggressor? How long can a brother remain composed while being described as an arch-nemesis, a villain, a cold-hearted destroyer of happiness? At what point does dignity turn into self-destruction? At what point does silence become complicity in your own character assassination? These are the questions insiders say William has been wrestling with for months. And they're the questions that pushed him to a turning point so dramatic that even seasoned royal aides couldn't believe it. The possibility of taking legal action against Prince Harry for defamation. But let's pause for a second. Let's ask the question you're probably asking right now. How did it get this bad? To understand that, we need to revisit some of the most explosive claims Harry has ever made. Claims that didn't just bruise William's image, but threatened to redefine it entirely. The physical fight in 2019 was the biggest bombshell. Everyone remembers that revelation. The detail was cinematic. William allegedly grabbing Harry by the collar, ripping his necklace, knocking him to the floor over a heated argument about Meghan. Harry described the moment with painful clarity, painting William as a man who lost control. But the thing people often forget is that Harry also claimed William labeled Meghan as difficult, rude, abrasive, words loaded with character judgments. Words that would stick. Words that millions would internalize as proof of William's hostility toward Meghan and everything she represented. And it didn't stop there. Harry wrote about William recoiling, literally pulling back. When Meghan tried to hug him during their first meeting, he portrayed the moment as a collision of cultures, as if Meghan's warmth exposed some cold, stiff defect in the future king. He described William advising him to slow down, questioning whether Meghan's background, career, and American identity were compatible with royal life. These weren't neutral observations. They were accusations layered with implication. Implication that William was unwelcoming, snobbish, possibly prejudiced. And then came another grenade. Harry calling William his arch-nemesis. Not rival, not competitor, nemesis. A word soaked in bitterness and cinematic finality. A word you don't typically use to describe your brother unless the relationship has been poisoned beyond repair. Now, when a prince uses a word like nemesis, the world listens. And when he repeats the claim across interviews, promotional appearances, and streaming documentaries seen by tens of millions, that word becomes part of William's public identity, whether he likes it or not. But here's where things take a turn. For the longest time, William believed silence was his shield. He thought that the high road, the royal road, was the safe road. But silence only works when the other side is also silent. And Harry hasn't been silent. Not even for a moment. Each new interview, each new book excerpt, each new documentary segment added another chapter to a story the world thought it already knew, but actually didn't. Because the more Harry spoke, the more William felt trapped in a narrative he couldn't control. A narrative that painted him as the entitled, privileged, emotionally stunted older brother who couldn't handle Harry's independence or Meghan's presence. A narrative that suggested he didn't just disagree with his brother, but actively harmed him. Physically, emotionally, repeatedly. And then something happened, something insiders whisper about with uncomfortable glances. Something that finally pushed William over the edge. It wasn't a single line in Spare. It wasn't one scene in the Netflix documentary. It wasn't Meghan's hug moment or the necklace incident or the slowdown comment. It wasn't even the arch-nemesis branding. It was the accumulation of all of it. The unrelenting drip feed of negative portrayals. The memes. The jokes. The social media fury directed at him and Kate. The headlines that turned allegations into presumed truths. The belief, among some corners of the internet, that William was a violent tyrant who lashed out at his brother in blind rage. And perhaps the worst part? The idea that William's silence made it all seem even more believable. So William did something unprecedented. Something no one expected. Something that left people inside Kensington Palace absolutely stunned. He quietly reached out to legal advisors. Now imagine being a royal aide who has served the palace for decades. Imagine knowing that the unwritten rule of royal life is simple: never sue your own family. Never publicly contradict them. Never drag the monarchy into the mud of legal battles or public spectacles. And then suddenly, the future king is asking questions about legal thresholds for defamation, about what counts as factual misrepresentation, about what level of personal damage warrants formal action. Some aides reportedly begged him to reconsider. Others saw it coming for months. A few believed it was inevitable, maybe even overdue, because William wasn't acting out of rage. That's what makes this even more dramatic. He was acting out of duty, responsibility, his role as future king. He believed, and still believes, that the monarchy cannot withstand repeated, global, unchallenged character attacks from one of its own senior members. And the deeper he looked, the more he realized that this wasn't just about one fight in a kitchen or one rude remark or one uncomfortable hug. It was about a narrative being built slowly, methodically, and emotionally, one that cast him as the antagonist in Harry's heroic journey. But let me ask you this. Do you think William sees himself as the villain? Do you think he believes he was the cruel older brother Harry described? Or do you think he sees the story differently, far differently, and feels that it's time the world knew his version? This is the heart of why legal action is on the table. Because a defamation case doesn't just punish falsehood, it forces clarity, forced disclosure, forced truth, or at least forced confrontation. And if there's one thing William believes Harry has never truly done, it's confront the full reality of their past without bias, bitterness, or selective storytelling. But here's where the story turns into something even bigger than two brothers at war. William isn't making this decision alone. There are advisors, senior royals, comms teams, legal experts, crisis managers, and all of them understand something terrifying. Once William chooses this path, there is no going back. Because imagine the headlines, the global frenzy, the historical implications, a future king suing the son of his late mother, a monarchy trying to survive modern scrutiny, suddenly dragged into a courtroom drama unlike anything before. It would be catastrophic, or cleansing, risky, or necessary, a disaster, or a turning point. Everyone around William knows this case could either restore the monarchy's dignity or tear it apart. And deep down, Harry knows it too. That's why, according to insiders, he reacted with shock, the kind of shock that comes when someone realizes their words have consequences far beyond what they imagined. He thought William would be angry, hurt, maybe even distant. But take him to court? Never. That wasn't in the script Harry had been following. That wasn't part of the dynamic he understood. William was always the controlled one, the predictable one, the sensible one, the one who would endure anything rather than break royal protocol. Except this time, he might break it. Because William is done, and Harry is stunned. And you know what makes this even more gripping? The palace has been preparing for this moment silently, strategically, behind the scenes, far earlier than the public realizes. Meetings, drafts, memos, conversations that would flip the world upside down if they ever became public. Because behind the polished royal images, there's a storm brewing. One that could rewrite royal history. One that could expose secrets neither brother expected to face. One that could change their lives, their legacy, their futures. And it all begins with one decision. A decision William has already made. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What do you do when silence becomes more dangerous than the truth? What happens when the fear of speaking out finally becomes smaller than the cost of staying quiet? That's the question that hit Prince William like a tidal wave in the days leading up to what insiders now call the most consequential turning point of his adult life. And it didn't happen with cameras rolling. It didn't happen in a palace hallway. It didn't happen during an official engagement, surrounded by staff, flashing bulbs, or smiling crowds. It happened in the quiet, in those private moments where a man confronts the pressure he has been running from for far too long. And according to those closest to him, this was the moment William realized something terrifying. If he didn't take control of the narrative would eventually consume him. Because after Harry's memoir had settled into bestseller lists, after the Netflix docuseries had stirred global outrage, after social media had carved William into a caricature of himself, the cold, angry, privileged heir, the consequences began to take a different shape. Not public ones, personal ones, the kind that ripple silently until they hit you like a punch to the chest. The kind that force you to admit that the brother you once protected, defended, and loved is now the person painting you as the villain in front of the entire world. And here's the twist that no one expected. The breaking point didn't begin with William's anger. It began with his exhaustion. Imagine being told your whole life that you must be composed, calm, and measured. Imagine being raised with the idea that your emotions are secondary, that your duty is primary, and that your reactions must always be filtered through the lens of how the public might interpret them. Imagine carrying that weight into adulthood, then into marriage, then into fatherhood. Then imagine your own brother, your childhood companion, your partner in pain, your co-survivor of the unimaginable, publicly describing you as a violent man capable of losing control so aggressively that he knocked him to the ground and ripped his necklace. Not in a private family conversation, not in a mediated discussion, not in a carefully negotiated statement, but in a global bestseller, and then again in interviews, and again in documentaries, and again in promotional clips. At some point, even a future king asks, "Is this fair?" You have to remember something critical here. William didn't read Spare alone. He didn't watch the documentary alone. He didn't endure the media storm alone. Kate was right there with him. His children were right there in the line of fire, too young to understand, but old enough one day to read everything. Royal advisors reported a moment, sometime after the book launch, when William sat with the weight of it all and said a single sentence that made everyone in the room go still. "This won't stop unless I stop it." Not out of rage. Out of clarity. Out of necessity. Because the truth is, William had hoped time would heal things. He believed the media cycle would eventually move on. He believed Harry would tire of telling the same stories. He believed that if he stayed silent long enough, his dignity would speak louder than Harry's accusations. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, the silence created a vacuum. And the vacuum amplified Harry's voice. And Harry's voice shaped a global perception that William could no longer ignore. But the real breaking point didn't come from the public reaction. It came from the people closest to him. From the conversations he could no longer avoid. From the emotional burden he saw Kate carrying. From the questions his aides were being asked at private dinners, briefings, and media background sessions. From advisors who whispered behind closed doors that the monarchy's image was at risk in ways the public did not yet fully understand. And then came the moment insiders refer to as the shift. It happened late one evening inside Kensington Palace. No pomp, no dramatic confrontation. Just William sitting at the long oak table in the private study he rarely uses. Papers spread out. Notes scribbled in the margins. Screenshots of online commentary. Headlines accusing him of everything from emotional manipulation to physical abuse. Clips of commentators calling him controlling or dangerous. analysts dissecting his facial expressions as if they were confessions. He studied the words, the accusations, the scenes replayed through Harry's lens, and above all, the aftermath. Because every time Harry released a new story, a new clip, or a new claim, Kate felt it. William felt it. The palace felt it. The country felt it. The world felt it. And William realized something brutal. Harry wasn't just criticizing him. He was redefining him. But here's the contradiction that makes this moment so emotionally charged. William still loved his brother. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that he no longer recognized the version of himself that Harry was presenting to the world. And if he didn't recognize it, if Kate didn't recognize it, if advisors and longtime friends didn't recognize it, then how could it be allowed to stand? Let me ask you directly. If someone you love tells a story about you that the world believes, but you know isn't accurate, how long would you tolerate it? How long would you let your reputation fracture? How long would you swallow your pain to preserve their comfort? And at what point would you say, this ends now? That was William's exact inner conflict. The contradiction pulling him in two directions. The emotional tug-of-war between family loyalty and personal dignity. Between brotherhood and truth. Between silence and action. Because William is not impulsive. He is not emotional in the way Harry is. He does not speak to cameras about private family moments. He does not turn pain into content. He does not perform vulnerability for public sympathy. He internalizes everything. He grieves privately. He suffers quietly. And that's precisely why the breaking point hit him harder than anyone realized. According to palace insiders, the moment that pushed him into serious consideration of legal action was shockingly mundane. Not a dramatic headline, not a fiery documentary segment, but a casual conversation, innocent on the surface, between him and a longtime advisor. The advisor said, in a tone meant to be comforting, "Don't worry, sir. Most of the public knows you're not actually like that." And William froze. Because that sentence, the reassurance meant to soothe, was actually confirmation of his worst fear. There were people who believed he was like that. Not trolls. Not critics. Not Meghan supporters. Normal people. People who didn't know him personally but believed Harry's depiction enough that advisors needed to defend him from it. That was the moment William realized Harry's words had done real-world damage. Damage that silence could no longer mend. Damage that time would not automatically heal. Damage that could one day affect his reign, his authority, and the legacy of the monarchy. And once that realization hit, everything changed. In the days that followed, William began asking questions. Carefully at first. Quietly. Systematically. He wanted to know what legal protections existed. He wanted to understand what counted as defamation. He wanted clarity on whether personal accounts could be challenged in court if proven misleading, exaggerated, or outright false. He wanted to know if a prince could sue his brother without triggering constitutional crises or political repercussions. He wanted to know how the monarchy historically handled such betrayals. But most importantly, he wanted to know whether his silence was now doing more harm than good. Advisors tried to slow him down. Some argued the monarchy must remain above public legal disputes. Others warned of media backlash. A few suggested simply continuing to ignore Harry's claims. And one very senior figure warned that suing Harry would rip open wounds that have barely begun to heal. But William didn't see wounds. He saw infection. And infection spreads. Then came the moment that solidified everything. Reports say William received a confidential binder, a collection of the most damaging interpretations of Harry's claims. Not from tabloids, from legitimate media, from respected commentators, from global outlets that rarely sensationalize. The binder included analysis of the public perception shift since Spare. It included data on trust levels, credibility, and emotional sympathy. It included breakdowns of how Harry's narrative had altered the way international audiences viewed William. The numbers were sobering. People believed Harry. A lot of them. Too many of them. Thousands of messages calling William abusive. Videos portraying him as emotionally unstable. Infographics treating Harry's recollections as proven fact. Comment threads attacking Kate for enabling William's alleged behavior. And then came the worst part. Projections of how this narrative could impact William's future role as king. That was the moment everything crystallized. William wasn't doing this to punish Harry. He wasn't doing it to embarrass him. He wasn't doing it to win public approval. He was doing it to protect the role he was born into. the institution he will one day lead, and the family he must safeguard. That was the breaking point. The cold, heavy, final realization that if he didn't take action now, Harry's version of their past might become the world's permanent version. Silence was no longer a shield. It was a weapon being used against him. And so William made the first step. He initiated a discreet consultation. He sought the legal angle. He set the wheels in motion. But the advisors feared something far more dramatic was coming. Because if William was ready to take this unprecedented step, then the palace would need to prepare for something bigger than a lawsuit. Something that no royal crisis team had ever navigated before. And what came next would move the royal conflict from a family drama into a global spectacle, one that neither brother was emotionally prepared for. What happened in that secret meeting would change the monarchy forever, and absolutely no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what it looks like when a royal crisis reaches its boiling point? Not the public-facing version with polished statements and carefully worded press releases. Not the staged family gatherings or stiff balcony photos meant to project unity. I'm talking about the real crisis, the raw panic, the behind-the-scenes emergency gathering where everyone suddenly realizes, this is not going away. This is not fizzling out. This is not manageable with silence anymore. This is something else entirely, something dangerous, something explosive. And that is exactly what the atmosphere felt like in the private conference room inside Kensington Palace on the day William called an emergency meeting that caught even his most senior advisors completely off guard. The moment was triggered by one thing: William's decision that legal action was no longer just an option, it was a necessity. And when a future king walks into a room with that kind of resolve, everyone feels the shift instantly. According to insiders, he entered the room without the usual calm nods or polite greetings. There was no small talk, no gentle lead-in, no easing everyone into the gravity of the moment. He walked in, closed the door, and said the sentence that froze the entire room. "We need to discuss legal options against my brother." Silence. Heavy, thick, uncomfortable. A silence so profound that you could feel everyone's heartbeat adjusting to the pressure. And the people in that room were not ordinary staff members. They were the highest-ranking advisors in the palace hierarchy. Senior communication strategists, private secretaries, legal consultants, security heads, and 2 members of the crisis team who had seen everything from royal divorces to public scandals to tabloid storms. But this was different. This wasn't a court battling the press. This wasn't a charity under scrutiny. This wasn't a rogue advisor mishandling a statement. This was a future king discussing taking his own brother to court. Ask yourself this. When was the last time something like that even happened? When was the last time a royal family was so fractured that legal action became a real possibility? It's almost unheard of in modern royal history. The monarchy survives by preserving internal unity, even when that unity is fake, fragile, or falling apart behind closed doors. But William wasn't interested in pretending anymore. And that decision alone changed the energy of the room instantly. One advisor, an older man who had served William and Harry since they were boys, reportedly cleared his throat and said carefully, "Sir, are you certain this is the direction you want to take?" And William answered without hesitation, "I am." Not angrily, not emotionally, but firmly, controlled, confident, like a man who had already weighed every possible consequence and made peace with all of them. Then he said something that raised the stakes even higher. "This cannot continue. He has misrepresented me publicly for too long, and it must be addressed formally." Now imagine sitting in that room hearing those words. Imagine realizing that the decades-long unwritten rule of never attack your own family publicly had just been shattered in one sentence. Imagine understanding that the monarchy, built on image, tradition, and unity, was about to walk into uncharted legal territory. Imagine knowing that the decision William was making could spark the biggest royal crisis since Diana's BBC interview. That's when one of the communications directors finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but the concern beneath it was unmistakable. "Sir, if this becomes a legal matter, the entire world will scrutinize every detail. Every statement, every moment of the past. Everything becomes evidence." And William replied with something that shocked everyone. "Then let them scrutinize everything. I have nothing to hide." That was the moment the room shifted from fear to realization. William wasn't bluffing. He wasn't venting. He wasn't speaking in anger. He was stepping into this with eyes wide open, fully aware that legal cases are unpredictable and messy, even more so when family is involved. But he was ready. The advisors, however, were not. A legal expert sitting at the far end of the table slowly opened a folder he had brought with him, one that had been prepared weeks earlier just in case William ever requested it. It contained potential legal interpretations of Harry's claims, assessments of what might qualify as defamation, and rough estimates of what level of damage could be proven in court. The fact that this folder even existed was a sign of how deeply the palace had been anticipating this moment. He slid the folder across the table to William and said, "Sir, before you proceed, you must understand something. Bringing this to court means opening private family moments to public interrogation. You would need to testify. You would need to provide evidence. You would need to let lawyers question your character, your actions, your emotions." And William, without missing a beat, whispered, "Harry already did that to me. I will not let his version stand as the only truth." The contradiction here is powerful. William has spent his entire life being the institutional brother, the rule follower, the stable one. And now here he was, defying the institution itself for the sake of personal truth. The future monarch challenging royal tradition in order to protect his own identity. The air-breaking protocol, because the alternative was letting the public believe a version of events he knew was false. But the meeting wasn't emotional. It was tactical. It was controlled. It was strategic, because that's how William operates. One by one, advisors began outlining potential strategies. Public statements, private mediation, press interventions, legal warnings, reputational management. But William shook his head. No more statements. No more background briefings. No more letting others speak for me. He wanted formal action. A clear, official, public declaration that he rejected Harry's claims and was willing to fight them through legal channels. That's when one of the younger communication strategists, known for being bold enough to ask questions others wouldn't, leaned forward and said quietly, "Sir, have you considered how Harry will respond?" And William gave a half-smile. Not a warm one, not a cruel one, but a resigned one. "Harry will do what Harry always does, but I will do what I must." Ask yourself, is that not the statement of a man who has reached the end of his patience? A man who has realized that family loyalty cannot override personal integrity forever? A man who has tried silence, tried dignity, tried distance, and finally seen that none of it has stopped the avalanche? But then came the moment in the meeting that shook everyone. One of the legal advisors, a man known for his seriousness and precision, softly said, "There is one part of the memoir, sir, one part that is legally vulnerable in a way the others are not." This sentence changed the temperature of the room instantly. Because here's the thing, not all allegations in Spare carry the same legal weight. Some are opinions. Some are emotional interpretations. Some are subjective recollections. But a few, just a few, present factual claims that can be challenged in court if proven false. "Which one?" William asked. The advisor hesitated. And then he said it. "The physical altercation." Those 3 words dropped into the room like a stone. He continued carefully. "If there is any evidence or testimony that contradicts Harry's version of the incident, it becomes disputable in court. That could serve as the foundation of your claim." And William leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. "What kind of evidence?" The advisor replied, "Witness accounts, security logs, medical assessments, text messages, anything that establishes an alternative version of the event." Let that sink in. Anything. Because what the public never knew, what Harry never mentioned, was that the palace kept records of nearly everything. Security briefings, staff presence logs, visitor logs, notes from private secretaries, communications timestamps. And while that doesn't automatically prove or disprove Harry's story, it means the palace might have more information than anyone realizes. This was the moment the meeting became more than a discussion. It became a plan. But something else happened, something subtle but revealing. As the advisors discussed legal angles, a deeper concern surfaced, the monarchy's image itself. A lawsuit wasn't just William versus Harry. It was the future king versus a man beloved by millions worldwide. and that created a new fear in the room. "What about public backlash?" one advisor asked. And William answered simply, "There will be backlash no matter what I do." He was right. Silence had backlash. Speaking out had backlash. Taking action had backlash. There was no option left that didn't come with consequences. And William knew it. But then came the real shock of the meeting, something only a few insiders had anticipated. One of the palace's top crisis advisors, a woman known for her sharp instincts, leaned in and asked the question that stopped the entire room cold. "Sir, before we proceed, we need to be sure of one thing. Are you prepared for the truth to come out? Because legal action has a way of exposing everything. Everything. Not just the moments Harry described, not just the scenes in Spare, not just the arguments and misunderstandings, but the emotions, the anger, the hurt, the things both brothers buried." And William looked up, eyes steady, and said the line that changed the trajectory of the meeting. "The truth is all I have left." But while William was ready to step into the fire, the advisors were terrified of the blaze that might follow. They warned him that a case like this could drag on for months, maybe years. They warned him that the media would swarm, that cameras would follow his every move, that Harry would counterattack, publicly, loudly, emotionally, that Meghan's involvement would be dissected endlessly, that Kate would be scrutinized, that comparisons to Diana would resurface, that allies would be forced to pick sides, that the monarchy would be exposed in ways it had never been exposed before. But William didn't back down. He quietly said, "I will not let my silence be twisted anymore." And that was when the room went silent again, not out of fear this time, but out of understanding. William wasn't acting impulsively. He was acting inevitably. The meeting ended with a decision: move forward with preliminary legal steps. But as everyone stood up to leave, one advisor pulled William aside and whispered something that sent a chill through him. "Sir, someone has already leaked that you're considering legal action." This revelation hit like thunder, because if word was already spreading, then the palace wasn't dealing with just a legal crisis. They were dealing with an internal betrayal. And what they discovered next would turn the entire situation on its head, and no one in the room was prepared for who the leak might be. What if everything you thought you knew about the infamous 2019 fight between Prince William and Prince Harry was only half the story? What if the version Harry shared in Spare, the version read by millions, debated across continents, dissected on social media, wasn't the full picture? What if that night, the one described as a violent outburst by an unhinged older brother, held layers, contradictions, and unseen details the world has never heard before? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Whenever one person tells a story about a private moment, the world tends to accept it as fact, even when only half of the participants have spoken. And Harry's version wasn't just a memory. It was a carefully constructed narrative in a best-selling memoir, positioned as a definitive account. But inside Kensington Palace, that scene, the heated argument, the ripped necklace, the alleged shove, sits at the center of a far more complex timeline. A timeline insiders say Harry simplified, dramatized, and, in some places, misrepresented. And it is this incident, above all others, that William's legal team flagged as the potential cornerstone of a defamation claim. So let's go back. Let's return to the night in question. Let's walk through the emotions, the tension, the misunderstandings, and the explosion that changed everything. And let's ask the one question few people ever consider. What if both brothers walked away from that argument believing they were the wronged one? The night began with frustration, not rage. William arrived at Harry's London home because he wanted a conversation that had been avoided for months. Ever since Harry and Meghan had become engaged, unresolved tensions simmered beneath every exchange. Meghan felt unwelcome. Harry felt protective. William felt cautious. Kate felt overwhelmed. The staff felt confused. And the media pressure magnified every insecurity, every misunderstanding, every silent judgment between the brothers. William came that night because he believed, naively, perhaps optimistically, that he could talk to Harry without cameras, without staff, without royal formality suffocating them. He thought honesty might heal something. He didn't expect it would shatter everything instead. Harry, on the other hand, was already on edge. He later wrote that William arrived piping hot, ready for confrontation. But insiders who were present earlier in the evening claim William was exhausted, not enraged. Tired of miscommunication. Tired of gossip. Tired of Harry assuming the worst. And most of all, tired of being painted as the villain simply because he was cautious. Now imagine these two men, brothers bound by grief, love, rivalry, and obligation, standing across from each other in a small, private kitchen. No cameras. No public. No advisors. Just years of frustration pressing down on their shoulders like weights they could no longer carry. And then came the trigger. William raised concerns about Meghan, concerns Harry interpreted as attacks. Harry defended her fiercely. William insisted he wasn't trying to criticize her personally, but was relaying impressions from staff who felt overwhelmed or disrespected. Harry heard judgment. William heard deflection. Their words clashed, collided, spiraled. Each sentence carried the weight of unspoken history. And then came the spark that ignited the explosion. Harry accused William of repeating tabloid narratives. William accused Harry of being blind to the chaos around him. Harry said William didn't understand Meghan's world. William said Harry didn't understand the monarchy's world. Words sharpen. Voices rise. Walls close in. And somewhere in that storm, somewhere between hurt and confusion and brotherly resentment, something snapped. Harry wrote that William grabbed him by the collar and knocked him to the floor. A dramatic moment. A powerful image. One that traveled the world in headlines within minutes. But here's where the contradiction begins. Advisors say William's recollection is different, not just in tone, but in sequence. Not an attack, not a shove, not a violent blow. More of an uncontrolled moment during an already heated argument. A physical interaction, yes, but not the cinematic assault Harry described. Something messy, something regrettable, something neither intended. William's advisors even suggest there were details Harry omitted. Details that complicate the idea of him being purely a victim, like the fact that Harry allegedly stepped forward first, like the fact that William supposedly tried to leave the room twice, but Harry blocked him, like the fact that both brothers were shouting so loudly that security staff positioned themselves in the hallway, unsure whether to intervene. None of this appears in Spare. That's the problem with personal narratives. They often choose sides. But then there's the necklace. Harry said William grabbed him and snapped the necklace. He described picking up the broken pieces off the floor afterward. A powerful symbol, fragility, invasion, loss. But one palace insider claims something else entirely. That necklace was already fragile. It wasn't ripped, it snapped during the scuffle. Again, contradictory. Again, messy. But here's the part the public doesn't know. William apologized. Not days later. Not weeks later. Not after the press found out. That same night, Harry wrote that William returned looking regretful, asking him not to tell Meghan. But those close to William insist the apology came immediately, right after the physical moment, right after both brothers realized how far things had escalated. And Harry? He didn't accept it. Not fully. Not truly. Not in a way that calmed the tension. But can you blame him? When emotions run that high, when wounds run that deep, apologies feel like bandages placed over fractures. Still, there's something the memoir doesn't mention, something crucial. Before William left the house that night, he allegedly said, "We can fix this, but not if you keep misinterpreting everything I say." That line, in hindsight, feels like prophecy, because Harry did interpret things through a lens of hurt. And William interpreted Harry through a lens of frustration. And neither brother realized how deep the misunderstandings had grown. But here's where things get even more complicated. Legally, emotionally, historically. There may have been someone else present. A staff member stationed nearby. Not in the room, but close enough to hear the escalation. Close enough to observe the aftermath. Close enough for their testimony to matter if this ever went to court. Harry never mentioned this possibility. William's advisors won't confirm it directly. But the legal team's interest in the 2019 fight suggests they believe something about Harry's version is disputable, not because the event didn't happen, but because the nature of it may have been exaggerated, dramatized, or emotionally distorted. And that's where the potential legal fracture appears. Because defamation is not about whether something happened. It's about how it is portrayed. It's about whether a story leaves the room of memory and enters the courtroom of accusation. And right now, that's exactly where this 2019 fight is heading. But there's another twist, something no one saw coming. It wasn't Harry's description of the shove that concerned William's team the most. It was the emotional framing, the narrative implication that William was violent, unhinged, aggressive, and dangerous. That this moment wasn't a one-time mistake, but a pattern. That William was the embittered older brother who couldn't control his temper. That Meghan's arrival exposed the worst parts of him, and the world believed it. But advisors say there's a detail Harry left out, one that could flip the entire interpretation. After the fight, after the shouting, after the snap of the necklace, after the apology, William left the house. But he didn't leave angry. He left heartbroken, shaken, confused at how their bond had deteriorated so badly. And as he walked down the quiet London street, staff members say he whispered something. Maybe to himself, maybe to the air, maybe to the ghost of their mother. "This isn't us. How did we get here?" Harry didn't know he said that. The world didn't know he said that. But inside Kensington Palace, that line stayed with advisors for years. Because William wasn't the monster Harry wrote about. He was a brother trying to connect and failing. Failing hard. Failing painfully. Failing in ways that would haunt him long after the argument ended. And that's why the legal team is so focused on this moment. Not because they want to punish Harry for recounting an emotional memory, but because the way he framed it created a lasting, damaging perception. And that perception now has consequences far beyond that kitchen floor. Because this one fight, this single night, this raw and human moment, may become Exhibit A in a courtroom battle that could shake the monarchy to its core. But here's the twist no one expected. The palace has documentation of what happened after the fight. Communications, internal reports, security notes, details Harry never mentioned. And what's inside those documents is the reason William believes he can win. But before the legal team could move forward, they needed to address the other half of the conflict, the part Harry blamed entirely on William, but insiders say was far more complicated. Because the fight wasn't really about physical aggression. It was about Meghan. And what came next would expose the deepest fault line between Harry, William, and the woman who changed everything. And absolutely no one is prepared for what that truth reveals next. What if the real battle between Prince Harry and Prince William was never truly about them? What if the fight, the resentment, the unraveling of a once unbreakable brotherhood was ignited by someone who wasn't even in the room that night? Someone whose presence in the royal orbit didn't just shift the dynamics, but detonated them? Because according to palace insiders, Meghan Markle wasn't merely a point of tension. She was the epicenter of a cultural collision, an ideological clash, and an emotional conflict that neither brother fully understood until it was far too late. But here's the twist most people don't see coming. Meghan wasn't the villain. And she wasn't the victim. She was the spark. Yes, but also the mirror. The mirror that reflected back every insecurity, every unresolved issue, every hidden resentment Harry and William had been carrying their entire lives. And once that mirror appeared, everything they'd suppressed for decades suddenly became impossible to ignore. So let's go back to the beginning. Not the wedding, not the engagement, not the fight. Earlier, the moment Harry first introduced Meghan to William and Kate. Harry remembers it as cold, distant, maybe even judgmental. He said William recoiled when Meghan hugged him, a physical reaction he interpreted as rejection, a cultural clash, a sign that Meghan wasn't welcome in the royal system. But insiders paint a more nuanced picture. They say William wasn't recoiling, he was startled. Because in his world, spontaneous physical affection from someone he barely knew wasn't normal. Royals aren't raised with hugging. They're raised with boundaries. Protocol. Reserve. Not coldness, just controlled warmth. But Harry didn't see it that way. He saw rejection. He saw disapproval. He saw Meghan being dismissed before she even had a chance. And that right there, right in that tiny, fleeting, 3-second moment, was the seed, the root, the origin point of a misunderstanding that would one day explode into a global royal war. Because after that moment, everything Meghan did or said was filtered through two completely different realities. To Harry, Meghan was the woman who saved him, the woman who gave him freedom, the woman who understood his trauma, the woman who pulled him out of a system he felt was suffocating him. To William, she was the woman he worried might push Harry into making decisions he couldn't take back. The woman whose unfamiliarity with royal life could create chaos, not intentionally, but through sheer difference. The woman whose presence intensified Harry's resentment toward the palace. Not villain, not hero, just different. Dangerously different in a world that doesn't handle difference well. And here's the truth that makes everything even more emotionally tangled. Meghan didn't understand what she walked into. How could she? No one does. She thought her charisma, her empathy, her modern outlook would be an asset. She thought being real, approachable, and genuine would break barriers. She didn't realize barriers exist in the monarchy for a reason. Not maliciousness, survival. When she hugged William, she wasn't being disrespectful. She was being human. And when William flinched, he wasn't being arrogant. He was being royal. But Harry saw humiliation. And that made him defensive. Fiercely defensive. Aggressively protective. Because for the first time in his life, Harry had someone outside the institution he loved more than the institution itself. And that changed everything. William sensed the shift immediately. Kate did too. The staff definitely did. And from that moment on, every misunderstanding grew teeth. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone you love fall headfirst into a relationship so intense, so fast, so all-consuming that it changes everything about them? Their priorities, their reactions, their emotional equilibrium. Now imagine watching that happen not as a friend, but as the future king responsible for safeguarding the monarchy. Imagine needing to protect your brother and the institution at the same time. Imagine the impossible pressure of trying not to lose one while defending the other. That's the position William was in. And Harry misread it. He saw caution as criticism. He saw concern as sabotage. He saw skepticism as jealousy. He saw boundaries as hostility. And Meghan? She saw all of it, felt all of it, and interpreted it through her own lived experiences. Experiences shaped by Hollywood, independence, ambition, and a career where open communication is the norm, not the exception. But the monarchy is not Hollywood. And William is not a coworker. And Kate is not a casual acquaintance. They don't hug strangers. They don't overshare. They don't improvise. They observe, analyze, assess. Slowly, carefully. Meghan walked in with warmth. William met her with reserve. Two perfectly normal human reactions, clashing catastrophically. And that clash grew into something much bigger. Because Meghan didn't only represent difference. She represented change. And change terrifies institutions built on tradition. But here's where the narrative takes a sharp turn, one almost no one talks about. Inside the palace, the issue wasn't Meghan's personality. It was the pace of the relationship. William advised Harry to slow down, not because Meghan was American, or an actress, or divorced, or older. Those are interpretations Harry projected. But because William believed Harry was rushing into something emotionally combustible. And he was right. Every major shift in the monarchy has consequences. Marriages, departures, media storms, public expectations. And Harry's rapid emotional escalation with Meghan created structural pressure the palace didn't know how to absorb. So tension grew, and assumptions hardened, and narratives split into two opposing realities. Harry's version. Meghan is misunderstood, mistreated, undervalued, and intentionally pushed out. William's version. Meghan is misaligned with royal life, overwhelmed, and accelerating Harry's emotional instability. Both versions have truth. Both versions have bias. Both versions are raw, real, and incomplete. And that's why the 2019 fight wasn't just about a physical moment. It was about years of resentment rooted in Meghan. Let's circle back to the fight for a moment. Remember how Harry described William calling Meghan difficult, rude, and abrasive? Those words stung deeply. Harry saw them as attacks on his wife's character. But palace insiders insist those words weren't William's personal assessment. They were feedback from staff overwhelmed by Meghan's expectations. To Harry, it felt like an insult. To William, it was him relaying concerns. To Meghan, it was proof she wasn't accepted. To staff, it was them desperately trying to navigate a new, unpredictable energy. For perspectives, for truths, for emotional reactions. No villains, just collision. And that's where the defamation issue becomes razor-sharp. Harry framed William's comments as judgmental. William insists they were contextual. Harry interpreted recoil as disrespect. William insists it was surprise. Harry portrayed William as unwelcoming. William insists he was cautious, not cruel. And courts don't deal with emotion. Courts deal with interpretation. Courts deal with impact. Courts deal with damage. Which is why this chapter of the story matters so much. Because William's advisors realized the fight wasn't isolated. It was part of a broader emotional arc Harry had crafted. A narrative painting William as hostile toward Meghan from the very beginning. And here's the legal problem. If William can prove his concerns were based on staff reports, not personal bias. If he can prove he never used the word difficult the way Harry implied. If he can prove he didn't recoil in disgust, but reacted out of instinct. Then Harry's framing becomes not just subjective, but potentially defamatory. Especially if public perception shifted dramatically because of those portrayals. And it did. The world loved Meghan. Harry adored her. And William became the obstacle in their love story. But what if that was never true? What if William was trying to protect Harry from a fast, chaotic transition? What if Meghan misinterpreted William's caution as coldness because she didn't understand royal culture? What if Harry misinterpreted everything because he was afraid history was repeating itself? Diana, isolation, emotional neglect. Because that fear shaped Harry's actions. And Meghan amplified them. And William shouldered the consequences. There's one more detail, one that changes everything. According to someone who was working closely with William at the time, Meghan made a remark early on that deeply affected him. Something that never made it into Harry's interviews or memoir. During a tense moment, Meghan allegedly said, "I don't need saving. I don't need teaching." That line hit William hard. Because he wasn't trying to teach her. He was trying to warn her. To protect her. To help her navigate the pressure that once destroyed his own mother. But Meghan didn't know that. Harry misunderstood it. And the damage was done. From that moment on, every conversation felt like a battle. Every gesture looked like an attack. Every disagreement became a symbol. Which brings us to the real question at the heart of this chapter. Was Meghan truly the problem? Or was she the catalyst revealing problems that were already there? Because the brothers' bond was fragile long before Meghan. The rivalry existed long before Meghan. The resentment simmered long before Meghan. She didn't create the fire. She just exposed the cracks in the floor. And the next chapter in the story proves that the turning point wasn't Meghan's arrival. It was her first real interaction with Kate. Because what happened at that first meeting? What was said behind closed doors? What Kate felt? And what Meghan never understood? Those details would fuel the tensions for years. And the truth about that moment is something the world has never heard until now. Have you ever watched a moment so small, so subtle, so ordinary on the surface, become the seed that grows into a full-blown family war? A moment so deceptively simple that no one realizes its significance until years later, when the consequences are already irreversible. That's exactly what happened the day Meghan Markle first met Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales. A meeting that should have been warm, hopeful, even joyful. Two worlds blending, two families connecting. Became the moment insiders quietly refer to as the beginning of the unraveling. And the craziest part? It all started with a hug. Not a dramatic outburst. Not an argument. Not a cultural lecture. A hug. But let's go back. Let's walk into that room with all its tension, expectation, and invisible pressure. Let's see what really happened beneath the surface. What Harry interpreted through emotion, what Meghan interpreted through instinct, what William and Kate interpreted through protocol, and why that one meeting still matters today, especially now that legal war looms between the brothers. Harry's memory, the one he shared in Spare, goes like this. Meghan greeted William with an open, heartfelt hug. A gesture of warmth and connection. William, taken aback, recoiled. Meghan felt rejected. Harry felt embarrassed. And he interpreted William's reaction as a sign that Meghan would never truly be welcomed by his family. But insiders say Harry's version leaves out something crucial, the emotional context. Because on that day, William and Kate weren't meeting a girlfriend. They were meeting a future duchess, a potential senior royal, a future partner in duty, responsibility, and royal obligation. And the palace had spent decades carefully shaping what that looks like. So when Meghan swept in with a burst of California warmth, open arms, direct eye contact, ready to embrace energy, it didn't read as friendliness to William. It read as unpredictability. It read as, she doesn't understand what this world demands. Not because Meghan did anything wrong, but because she didn't know the rules she was walking into. Now let's zoom out and look at the emotional stakes. For Harry, this was the woman he adored. For Meghan, this was an introduction into a new life. For William, this was a test of stability. For Kate, this was an unexpected shift in the family dynamic. And the truth is, Kate was the most unprepared of anyone. Because Harry didn't warn her. He didn't prepare her. He didn't say Meghan was warm, physical, affectionate. Kate walked in expecting hello. She got a hug, and she froze. Why? Because Kate spent a decade learning how to be royal before she ever married into the family. She learned it the hard way, navigating press scrutiny, public expectations, and endless protocols. She learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. She learned the difference between casual warmth and royal reserve. She learned how to protect her space, emotionally and physically. So when Meghan hugged her, Kate wasn't being rude. She was being royal. But Harry didn't see that. Meghan didn't realize that. William didn't explain it. And that silence created a crack. A tiny, invisible crack. One that would widen with every misunderstanding that followed. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where two people from different worlds misread each other instantly? And you can almost feel the awkwardness thickening in the air? That was this moment. Meghan interpreted the stiffness as judgment. Kate interpreted the enthusiasm as boundary crossing. Harry interpreted the tension as unfair scrutiny. William interpreted it as a warning sign. And nobody said anything. Nobody cleared the air. Nobody explained. Nobody reassured. Nobody reset the tone. They all walked away carrying their own assumptions, their own interpretations, their own quiet insecurities. And those insecurities metastasized. But what happened next, after the hug, is the part almost no one knows. It's the part Harry didn't mention, and the part Meghan never publicly addressed. The conversation started politely. Meghan was charming, confident, eager to engage. Kate was friendly but cautious. William was polite but analytical. But beneath the surface, contradictions everywhere. Meghan spoke openly, freely, unfiltered, Hollywood style. Kate listened with the polished diplomacy of someone who had learned, painfully, that anything you say can become a headline. William observed with the wary eye of a future king assessing a potential addition to the monarchy. Harry beamed, excited, proud, and hoping desperately that this would go well. And then Meghan did something small, something kind, something human, but something the royal world wasn't used to. She cracked a joke, a bold one, a teasing one, a joke that, according to sources, made Kate slightly raise her eyebrows and made William look down at his hands. Harry laughed. Meghan smiled. Kate smiled politely. William stayed quiet, not because the joke was inappropriate, but because it was unfamiliar. People forget that William and Kate aren't like Harry. They don't bond through spontaneity. They bond through structure, through tradition, through shared experiences of the royal grind. Their world isn't built on improvisation. It's built on predictability. Meghan was unpredictable, beautifully so for Harry, unsettlingly so for William. But here's where the story takes a twist, one almost no one knows about. After Meghan left the room for a moment, Kate turned to William and, in a quiet voice only a few feet away could hear, said, "She's lovely, but Harry isn't prepared." That wasn't an insult. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't judgment. It was fear. Fear that Harry was diving into something too fast, too intensely, too emotionally charged for a royal life that already pushed him to his breaking point. But Harry interpreted every bit of caution as rejection. He didn't hear concern. He heard criticism. He didn't see care. He saw bias. He didn't feel supported. He felt undermined. And Meghan sensed that energy instantly. The next moment that shifted everything came when Meghan returned and tried to restart the conversation with the same warm, open tone. Kate tried to match it. William tried to keep up. But the tension was there, invisible but unmistakable. A tension born not of dislike, but of mismatch. And then came the question that changed the temperature of the room instantly. Meghan asked Kate how she managed to handle the British press. Kate hesitated. A long pause. Almost too long. Because what could she say? That the press nearly broke her? That she endured humiliation? That she cried alone for years? That she still has scars from it? But instead, she said the safest thing. You learn to adapt. Meghan didn't know that was code. Kate meant, you survive by shutting down the most vulnerable parts of yourself. Meghan heard, I'm fine. You'll be fine. And that misunderstanding made everything worse. Because Harry saw the hesitation. Meghan saw the reserve. William saw the misinterpretation forming right in front of them, and said nothing. Nobody knew how badly that moment would age. Nobody knew how loudly it would echo through the next months of tension. Nobody knew that years later, Meghan would sit in an interview and say she felt unsupported, and Harry would write in despair that William and Kate never embraced Meghan. But here's the twist. Kate actually wanted to help Meghan. She just didn't know how. And Meghan didn't know how to read Kate. And Harry didn't know how to bridge the gap. And William couldn't figure out how to say the one thing he needed to say. This world is harder than you think. The emotional disconnect solidified that day, not through hatred, not through conflict, but through misalignment. And it only got worse after the meeting.